EdCafes, students in charge of a corner of their universe. So first things first, what is an EdCafe? I'd say that an EdCafe is a way to structure class that promotes student choice and ownership over their own learning. It was built actually on the EdCamp model. I had been to EdCamp Boston, and I've attended a few more where you have these participant created sessions and participant led sessions, and you walk out of the day with such a sense of ownership and this excitement. And I said, how do I bring this to my classroom? So a logical next question is, why would you bring this structure into the classroom? Why would you do an EdCafe? As a teacher, I'd say the significant and the most powerful benefit is that it gives the students a structure and a way to run class, where I become much more of a facilitator of the sessions, of the schedule, but really students are bringing in what they're interested in talking about. They're bringing in things from the books and the primary sources, and they're empowered to direct the learning. And I think on the student end, like, why as a student would you want to do an EdCafe? It's because you're given that space and that ownership over the classroom discussions and over what you want to talk about and dig into and explore and interrogate and think about really in the class. So as a teacher, always setting up the classroom to say, how does my space best facilitate the task at hand? For EdCafes, since you're having 4 or maybe 5 conversations at a time in the room, you want to think about where does that happen best. So you can think about it like via different corners. For example, my classroom last year, we named them. We had the door corner and the flag corner. But also this year, I'm less about the corners, just the way my desks are, and more about the areas. So we say, oh, over in the map area, we're going to have this conversation, or back in the pinboard area, we're going to have this discussion. So now that you have your space set up, what do you talk about in these areas of the room? I like to think of it as a spectrum. You can start with more teacher-generated conversations and topics to, as you become more familiar with EdCafes, to more increasingly student-generated conversations and questions. For the teacher-generated ones, I tend to do them at the beginning of the unit. For example, this is for my chapter 1 of Lord of the Flies, which are big picture questions that I want to draw their attention to about characters and setting and so forth early in the book. But as students become and take more ownership and become more proficient with EdCafes, I would say that you'll find a wide variety of topics they're bringing up, from the questions that they have as they're reading, but also connecting to current events, setting themselves up for writing their own thesis or their own paper topics, right? I say that's a great way for you to bounce ideas off of groups. But also they get really philosophical. There's interesting provocations that happen when you give students the space to create their own discussions. All right, so now with a space to talk and things to talk about, you have to make the schedule. You have to say, okay, this is run like a conference, so we have these different sessions and we have the conversations within the sessions. So you can make the schedule in person. I've done that on the whiteboard, right? You've had these students who like go up to the whiteboard and actually they write in what their session topics are going to be. If you guys are online in class, so say you're all in the computer lab or you have some sort of access to technology, I either as a teacher have said, okay, Sam, like tell me what you're going to talk about. Jason, tell me what you're going to talk about. It's inefficient, but it gets it going. But if everybody's in the computer lab, you can invite them all to the same document. Or, ideally, and as things get more smoothly, it depends on your access to technology, the students will create the schedule ahead of time so that when you actually walk into class, the sessions are already typed up and ready to go, and you can just point to the board and say, okay, so Emily, start us off with what we're going to talk about today. And with that said, on the day that you're actually going to run an EdCafe, there's basically 4 parts. You have the schedule up on the board, and the student, so we have our student here who says, okay, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to introduce, they've already put their topic up, so they're going to introduce their topic. They say, in the map area, I'm going to be talking about Ralph and Piggy and the first time that they meet. And then they sit down. And then the other 3 people, so say there's 4 presenters, the other 3 people stand up, in the projector area I'm going to be talking about, and they sit down. So once the 4 presenters have said these are the topics, basically everybody else gets to join the conversations that they're really interested in talking about. So again, the group leader at this point, I listen for that first 30 seconds. I say, I'm eavesdropping on all of you to establish the conversation and say, here's what I've thought about and why I'm thinking about it. And then that group leader leads the discussion, draws from the expertise in the group, asks people what they're thinking about, goes back to the text. And then once the allotted time, and you can work on this, so 5 minutes, 7 minutes, whatever works with your class for the day, the group leader's last responsibility is to provide a takeaway to the rest of the class and say, you all didn't have the opportunity to, be with us, but here's an ongoing question that we have, or here's a connection that we made, here's something that we realized, here's something that we're still struggling with, and provide that broader takeaway to the class. And last but not least, you want to think about assessment. So as a teacher, if you are looking at assessing only the session leader for the day, you're looking at those 4 parts that they just did, right? Their introduction to everybody, the notes that they prepared for their session, the discussion that they led, right? Did it flow smoothly? Did they have multiple things to talk about? And then standing up and doing that takeaway. For both the introduction and the takeaway, I have students stand up. I think it's a really important low-risk presentation skills for them to stand up in front of everybody and just sit down wherever they are. But then you can also think about assessing the students the rest of the students in the class. And you can think about I do it through the notes that they take, and then that's also reinforcing note-taking. So you can collect the session notes by the group leader, right? Sam just led a session. Okay, Sam, go ahead and collect all the notes from your group there. You could also do by the student of the day. You can say, okay, at the end of the class today, I'm going to collect your notes for the entire day. So make sure you label them with what sessions you attended, and I'm going to be collecting them to skim through them as we wrap up at the end of the day as your exit ticket. Or your notes can be part of a broader note-taking requirement. For example, my students have to take 10 to 15 pages of notes in a unit. So I say, hey, today's an EdCafe day. You could definitely get 3 pages of notes done. That would be really beneficial to your overall note count. So think about how you want to utilize that and what conversations you want to go to today to really help yourself. And with all of that said, this has been a quick overview of EdCafes and how I run them in my classroom, but there's so many different ways that I've seen either teachers in my building or other teachers online who have started doing things in their own ways. And I think fundamentally, if it's rooted in the idea of student choice, and we go ahead and you hand over this space for students to run their own classroom, I think that is the most powerful part of what an EdCafe can be. So I have a website. It's called whatisanedcafe.wordpress.com. I'm trying to build it as I go, but please, if you're doing EdCafes and you have pictures or video or rubrics or student work from them, I would absolutely love for you to submit it, and I'll definitely put it up there. Feel free to see me on Twitter and tweet me at Katrina Kennett. And thank you so much.